Allow me to begin by painting a small scene. It's late evening, and I'm sitting in a quiet study, the lamp's glow casting soft shadows on old books and a teapot still warm from earlier. Outside, a breeze stirs the branches, and in that hush, I recall the many people I've spoken to, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, who seem trapped by certain emotions they can't quite break free from. Sometimes it's the snare of anger over perceived injustices. Sometimes it's a perpetual loop of fear and anxiety. Sometimes it's a sorrow that tightens around the heart like a vice. For years, I too have known these pitfalls, what I'll call emotional traps. Those states of mind that ensnare us, distort our reason, and lead us to act in ways we later regret. You might be looking for a way out, hoping to reclaim a sense of calm and choice in the face of strong emotion. Now, if you are new here, please like the video and subscribe. Statistics show that only 15% of my audience is subscribed to the channel, so if this content has helped you in any way, I ask you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's in the teachings of Stoicism that I found a sturdy lifeline, and it's through my own experiments in living that I discovered how to identify and break free from these traps. Stoics often speak of virtue, resilience, and the power of distinguishing what is within our control from what lies beyond it. Yet far from being a dry philosophy, I've come to see Stoicism as a hands-on set of tools for handling the tumult of real life. My hope in this script is to share that perspective as an older man who has spent much of his existence wrestling with and eventually navigating out of emotional pitfalls, using Stoic ideas as a guiding compass. This is not an abstract lecture. It's a reflection, a series of personal narratives and philosophical insights that might resonate if you too have felt the weight of emotions that refuse to let go. In these 4 parts, I'll explore how Stoic philosophy helps us spot the subtle signs of emotional entrapment: anger that masquerades as righteous indignation, anxiety that disguises itself as vigilance, shame that locks us in unproductive self-criticism, and crucially, how we might untangle ourselves from these states. A caveat: I do not claim this approach will instantly dissolve all turmoil. Stoicism is less a magic wand and more a daily discipline, a way of training the mind to respond with clarity rather than impulse. Still, in my experience, even partial adherence to Stoic methods can create a remarkable shift, from feeling possessed by emotion to noticing it, understanding its triggers, and choosing a response rooted in reason and moral steadiness. Let me begin by sharing a memory from my early middle years, when anger was my nemesis. I worked in a high-pressure environment, perpetually short on time and straining to meet deadlines. My temper, always a bit short, erupted at colleagues or loved ones over trivial provocations. On one occasion, a minor delay in a project caused me to lash out at a junior employee, publicly scolding him far beyond what was warranted. Minutes later, guilt flooded me, but I pretended otherwise. That pattern repeated. Anger flared, I inflicted harsh words, then I felt remorse. Yet somehow I blamed external factors, as though I couldn't help it. Over time, that anger trap isolated me. People tiptoed around my moods, and I saw my relationships, both at home and at work, erode. It was then I reread certain lines from Epictetus, the notion that events themselves do not harm us, but our judgments about them do. The same principle underlined that we have power over our reactions, though it often feels like we don't. This recognition unsettled me. Had I been indulging an illusion that my anger was inevitable? Was I really powerless? Or had I simply never learned to manage my emotional triggers? That question marked the start of my Stoic journey toward taming anger. I realized how I'd been stuck in a mental habit, an emotional trap. where every external frustration set off a chain reaction. Stoicism reminded me that between the external spark and my internal fire, there was a gap of judgment. If I could notice that gap, I might choose differently. But how? In this first part, I'll explore how Stoic thought helps us identify these traps, shining a light on the hidden assumptions that bind us. Then, in subsequent parts, I'll detail strategies for unmasking their triggers, loosening their grip, and replacing destructive emotional loops with reasoned calm. We'll talk about anger, fear, shame, guilt, jealousy, even those subtle, lingering resentments that corrode our peace. Some might ask, why Stoicism? Aren't there other schools of thought? Indeed, there are many, and each can offer insights. But I find that Stoicism, with its emphasis on discernment, discerning what is ours to shape and what is not, cuts right to the heart of emotional traps, which often spring from illusions about control or from unexamined beliefs about self-worth. Let's define what I mean by emotional trap. It is a recurring emotional pattern that hijacks your rational mind, causing you to react in ways you later regret or that perpetuate harm. Anger, for instance, can morph into bitterness if we dwell on perceived wrongs, fueling cycles of hostility. Anxiety can paralyze us from taking necessary actions or lead us to sabotage opportunities. Shame can lock us into a story that we are fundamentally flawed, making us withdraw or lash out. The Stoics recognized these patterns centuries ago, though they used terms like passions or disturbances. Their writings emphasize that while emotions themselves are natural, we often amplify them through faulty judgments, becoming ensnared. When that happens, we lose our equanimity. My purpose here is to show how, by applying Stoic principles, we can spot these pitfalls early and dismantle them before they take control. Let me describe a second personal anecdote, one from a dear friend whose struggle was with chronic anxiety. He was tormented by a fear of letting others down, convinced that every small misstep would tarnish his reputation or earn him ridicule. This anxiety trap led him to overwork, to double and triple check everything, missing out on the joys of life. At the root, Stoicism would say, was an overemphasis on external approval. He felt his worth depended on it. By reading Marcus Aurelius, he recognized that focusing on how others might judge him was focusing on something beyond his direct control. Bit by bit, he practiced returning to the question, did I act in accordance with my values? Did I do my best under these conditions? If yes, then whether people praised or criticized was less relevant. Over months, that shift in perspective loosened anxiety's grip. He still felt concern about how projects turned out, but no longer was he enslaved to the possibility of censure. It was as if he'd stepped out of the emotional trap into a freer space. This is a hallmark Stoic move, realigning your sense of worth from external events to your internal moral and rational efforts. That's the crux. Emotional traps often flourish because we attach ourselves to what Stoics label indifference, things like praise, blame, comfort, or external success. Those can matter in practical ways, but they aren't the ultimate source of well-being. When we tie our peace to them, we create conditions ripe for anguish. The Stoic approach says, let's identify those attachments, see how they breed certain emotional patterns, and then systematically question or dismantle them. In practical terms, how do you identify an emotional trap in your own life? You might start by noticing repetitive emotional loops. You keep getting angry over small slights, or you freeze in certain social or professional scenarios, or you carry guilt from old mistakes that cripples your present. These loops feel like a default setting. The Stoics teach us to observe them with curiosity. For instance, if you blow up in anger each time a co-worker interrupts you, Note that anger, step back from self-justification and ask, why does this bother me so profoundly? Is it because I perceive it as disrespect? And if so, why must that disrespect be catastrophic to my sense of self? This introspection can reveal hidden beliefs. Perhaps you equate being interrupted with losing authority. Stoicism says real authority comes from your inner steadiness, not from ensuring no one interrupts you. Once that belief sees the light of day, you can challenge it. Does an interruption truly diminish my worth? Or can I calmly reassert my voice without raging? Over time, that reflection undermines anger's hold. Let me structure this first part into a broader view. We're focusing on diagnosing the traps. In later parts, we'll detail how to break free. So I'll highlight a few major emotional traps. 1. The anger trap. People or events trigger you, you lash out, then rationalize or stew in resentment. Stoicism advises that anger often arises from feeling violated or disrespected. We imagine the world or others owe us a certain behavior, and when reality diverges, fury ensues. The trap is in the assumption that we can or should force the world to align with our preferences. We'll later see how Stoic practice can defuse that assumption. 2. The fear-anxiety trap. You obsess over possible negative outcomes, freeze or overcompensate, letting caution morph into paralysis. The root often lies in wanting guaranteed safety in a universe that offers no such guarantee. Stoicism invites us to accept risk, focusing on preparing rationally but not expecting certainty. 3. The guilt-shame trap. Perhaps a past mistake or perceived flaw leads you to carry constant self-reproach. Stoics note that while regret can guide improvement, clinging to guilt paralyzes growth. The trap is believing you must forever self-punish. Instead, Stoicism urges restitution where possible, then releasing the rest. 4. Envy-comparison trap. Observing others' successes triggers jealousy or feelings of inadequacy. Stoicism points out that external fortunes vary, and comparing yourself to others distorts your sense of control. The trap lies in attributing your happiness to outdoing others, rather than focusing on your own ethical development. 5. Chronic discontent. A vague sense that life is never enough, leading to constant dissatisfaction or restlessness. Stoics say we often chase illusions, thinking new possessions or accolades will fill the void. The trap is ignoring the possibility of contentment in the present, fueling an endless cycle of craving. In each of these traps, the common thread is an erroneous assumption that invests external conditions or fleeting judgments with too much power over our internal equilibrium. Stoicism teaches we must realign our emotional well-being with what truly lies in our control, our rational choices, our virtues, our interpretations. When we forget that, we become susceptible to these traps, repeating the same emotional loops. So the first step in breaking free is to spot the pattern. Instead of unconsciously repeating it, we name it. Here is my anxiety trap flaring up again, or I see that my anger trap is triggered by a sense of wounded pride. That naming already grants us some distance. As the Stoics would say, recognizing a passion for what it is loosens its hold. Another dimension is to notice the physical cues. Emotions manifest in our bodies: a tight chest, clenched jaw, sweaty palms, or shallow breathing. If we train ourselves to catch these signals early, we can intervene before the trap fully ensnares us. For instance, if your chest tightens each time you check your emails, suspecting a negative message from a colleague, you can pause, take a slow breath, and ask yourself, is this fear or anger forming? Why am I letting an email define my internal state? That pause, just a few seconds, embodies Stoic vigilance. Over time, these small interruptions become second nature, gradually weakening the reflex to spiral into full-blown emotion. Let me illustrate with a story about a man I once mentored who found himself repeatedly enraged at social media posts he deemed politically ignorant. He'd see a post, feel his blood boil, and spend hours arguing online, leaving him depleted and bitter. Recognizing this pattern as a trap, I suggested he follow the Stoic approach of naming the surge early. Each time he felt that spike of righteous anger, he'd step away from the screen, label it anger trap triggered by perceived stupidity. Then he'd ask, "Are these posts truly harming me? Or am I choosing to let them disrupt my peace? If I debate, will it yield rational dialogue, or is it a futile venting of frustration?" Realizing the futility, he began limiting his engagement, focusing on reasoned discussion only when beneficial. Over weeks, he reported fewer emotional flares, better use of his time, and a calmer mind. The Stoic approach saved him from hours of pointless rage. We see from these examples that identifying emotional traps is not about shame or denial. It's about calmly acknowledging they exist, seeing their triggers, and understanding the flawed assumptions that perpetuate them. That foundation sets the stage for the next phase, learning how to systematically dismantle or bypass these traps, which I'll explore in the following parts. We'll talk about techniques like negative visualization, used properly to diffuse fear, reframing insult so you don't crumble under criticism, practicing voluntary discomfort to reduce envy or discontent, and harnessing Stoic compassion to temper anger with understanding. For now, suffice it to say that this is the architecture upon which Stoics build their emotional freedom. Why is it important to break free from these traps? Because they drain our energy, harm our relationships, and keep us from acting in line with our higher aims. A man consumed by anger struggles to lead or collaborate effectively. One crippled by anxiety often misses opportunities for growth or connection. A person drowning in shame avoids vulnerability, stifling intimacy. A Stoic approach, by releasing us from these patterns, enables a richer, clearer existence. We can then channel our energies into what truly matters, building supportive bonds, pursuing meaningful work, cultivating virtue. That, in the end, is what Stoics call living according to nature, a life guided by reason, empathy, and the humble acceptance of reality. Let me close this first part by emphasizing that it all starts with the simple, though not easy, act of noticing. The moment you feel an emotional surge, be it anger, fear, envy, or something else, pause. That pause is the gateway to identifying the trap. Ask yourself, what exact emotion is this? What belief or assumption might be fueling it? Am I placing my peace in something beyond my control? You don't have to solve it all at once. The Stoics never pretend that centuries of conditioning or personal baggage dissolve overnight. Yet each pause, each conscious naming of the pattern, chips away at the trap's hold. Over time, you become more adept at spotting the first flicker of destructive emotion, and thus more capable of redirecting it. That redirection is what I'll cover in the next parts. Practical Stoic strategies to step out of the snare and walk forward with less burden. In short, this entire approach helps us transform emotional pain from a prison into a teacher. As we unravel how we became ensnared, we discover we can also unensnare ourselves. Stoicism is the compass that points us out of the maze, urging us to remember that while life can be harsh, our response can remain governed by reason. I've seen it in my own trajectory, in the calmer face I now see in the mirror each morning, in the more measured way I handle disputes, and in the warmth that returns to my interactions with those I love. It's not a perfect cure, but it is a path, one that invites you to walk it with a level head and a courageous spirit. Let me continue by taking us deeper into the heart of these emotional pitfalls, and more precisely, how we can begin loosening their grip once we've recognized them. In the previous section, I described how I first learned to spot the patterns of anger, anxiety, envy, or shame that seemed to hijack my better judgment, and how Stoic philosophy illuminated the illusions that fueled those emotions. This second part will be more hands-on. I'll focus on practical steps and thought processes that help in disentangling ourselves from these traps. After all, it's one thing to realize you're caught in a cycle of anger or fear, and another to extricate yourself from it in the moment it tightens around you. Let me begin by recalling an episode in my middle years when my temper nearly cost me a vital collaboration. I was leading a small team on a project that required extensive coordination with another department. I had painstakingly arranged a meeting where we'd iron out a shared timeline. Yet on that day, the other department's representative arrived half an hour late and seemed dismissive of our concerns. My blood began to boil. In a flash, I felt the old anger pattern flaring. They don't respect my time. This is unacceptable. I was on the brink of lashing out, but a thin thread of Stoic awareness tugged at me. Pause. Notice what's happening. So I paused, just long enough to recognize that yes, I was triggered, but that this man's tardiness might have reasons unrelated to contempt. I let out a slow breath. Instead of snapping, I calmly expressed that we were under tight deadlines and asked, "How can we move forward constructively?" He apologized, explaining a crisis in his department had delayed him. We resolved the matter with minimal friction. Later, I realized how close I'd come to derailing weeks of progress because of a default emotional trap, the assumption that tardiness equals disrespect and must be punished. That moment taught me the value of what I'll call the Stoic pause, a fleeting space you create between the emotional spark and your reaction. The challenge is how to reliably access that pause when emotions surge. Epictetus would say it begins with awareness. As soon as you sense your pulse quickening or your jaw clenching, you mentally tag the emotion, "This is my anger." By naming it, you transform it from an unconscious reaction into an observed phenomenon. Once you see it clearly, you can ask, "Is this within my control or not? Is the event that triggered me under my control, or is it something external? If external, can I change it by raging, or should I focus on guiding my own response?" That internal dialogue, brief as it might be, is the key to stepping away from reflexive behavior. Of course, easier said than done. When the emotion is intense, it can hijack reason swiftly. So let me share a practical tool, rehearsing how you'd like to respond in calmer times. Marcus Aurelius often reflected in the mornings that he would meet meddling, ungrateful, or arrogant people. Doing so prepared him to greet them without instant outrage. In your own life, you might foresee that a certain co-worker or family member tends to provoke you. Before encountering them next, imagine the scenario. Picture them acting in the exact way that usually sets you off. Feel that irritation start to rise. Then, in your mind, practice pausing. Ask the Stoic question, "Is my peace worth trading for this provocation?" Then visualize a calm, rational response. Maybe you assert your point firmly, yet without insult, or you decide to let go of minor slights. This mental rehearsal builds a sort of muscle memory. So, when real life unfolds similarly, your mind is less likely to autopilot into anger or another emotional trap. Let's move on to how Stoicism suggests handling fear or anxiety. Once you identify that anxious pattern, maybe you notice you're worrying obsessively about an outcome you can't fully control, you can apply negative visualization. This technique, if done properly, is one of the gems of Stoic practice. Let's say you fear giving a presentation at work, imagining catastrophic failure or harsh judgment. Negative visualization means calmly envisioning the worst realistic scenario. Maybe your slides glitch, or you stumble over your words, or your boss looks unimpressed. You let yourself see that scene fully, noticing the discomfort it brings up. But then you ask, even if this happened, would it truly destroy me? Could I adapt, apologize, fix the slides, or pivot to speaking without them? Usually the answer is that you'd survive. The Stoics believed that much of our fear stems from a vague sense that the worst outcome would be unendurable. By spelling it out, you dismantle that illusion. You see you'd find a way through, perhaps embarrassed but not ruined. This, ironically, lessens the grip of fear in the present. So next time anxiety arises, you can recall that even in the scenario you dread, you remain capable of a response. That knowledge saps anxiety of its power. One might ask, doesn't focusing on worst-case scenarios make me more anxious? If done without Stoic context, it might. But the Stoic method is purposeful. You visualize adversity not to dwell in doom, but to realize you can endure or respond effectively. This draws you closer to acceptance of life's uncertainties, reducing the terror that paralyzes. Over time, you discover that many of these worst-case fantasies rarely come to pass anyway, and even if they do, you handle them better than your fears predicted. That's the crux. Break free from the trap by acknowledging that your mind exaggerates threats and that your Stoic reason is strong enough to guide you through genuine crises. Let's consider shame or guilt traps next. Perhaps you berate yourself incessantly for a past mistake. Maybe a hurtful thing you said to a loved one, or a professional blunder that cost you or others dearly. The Stoic approach is not to dismiss wrongdoing, but to rectify it and then let go of needless torment. That might mean apologizing or making amends if possible. Once you've done what you can to address the harm, Stoicism argues there's no moral benefit in dwelling on guilt forever. The emotional trap is a distorted belief that perpetual shame is necessary penance, but that penance can freeze you, preventing forward motion or deeper contrition. A Stoic question: does my ongoing self-flagellation help anyone or anything, or does it just keep me trapped? Usually, it's the latter. By recognizing the trap, you can choose to pivot, channel that energy into constructive action, vow to act differently in the future. If you remain paralyzed by guilt, you continue harming yourself and possibly those around you by not stepping forward with renewed integrity. A friend of mine once confided he was haunted by guilt over how he'd mishandled a financial matter in a previous job. Though he'd admitted his error and tried to repay any losses, he still woke at night feeling he must punish himself further. Stoic reflection helped him see that genuine remorse had already spurred him to make amends. Additional guilt served no productive end. So, each time that guilt flared, he'd remind himself, "I've taken responsibility. I can learn from this and ensure I behave ethically henceforth." By reframing guilt as a teacher, not a lifelong tormentor, he broke that emotional cycle. The Stoics taught that once you extract the lesson from a misdeed, clinging to guilt is wasteful. The moral redemption lies in how you live going forward, not in indefinite self-laceration. Now, turning to envy and comparison, a co-worker or peer achieves some milestone, promotion, admiration, material success, and you feel a stab of inadequacy. The Stoic perspective is to see that your emotional trap stems from pinning your worth on outdoing or matching others, but their fortunes lie outside your direct control, as do many of their advantages or lucky breaks. When envy grips you, it can lead to bitterness or sabotage, harming relationships and your own peace. Stoicism suggests a dual remedy. First, remind yourself that true good is found in virtue and character, not in external trappings. Second, cultivate gratitude for what you do have, reaffirming that your life path is distinct. If that coworker has soared ahead in one domain, it doesn't negate your capacity to excel in another, or to live virtuously in ways that might not show up as flashy success. By recognizing that envy is a trap fueled by illusions of competition, you reduce its hold. Instead, you can muster genuine respect or even congratulation for their achievement, freeing your mind to focus on your own values. Over time, that shift spares you from the toxic comparisons that degrade morale and sabotage cooperation. The broader Stoic technique behind all these instances is re-examining your beliefs about control and worth. Emotional traps thrive on the false notion that external events, or others' opinions, or unattained desires define your fundamental well-being. Stoicism flips that script, saying your true well-being arises from how you govern your own mind and actions. When you catch yourself spiraling, be it in rage, anxiety, shame, envy, ask, am I investing my peace in something not fully under my control? Often the answer is yes. That realization can be surprisingly liberating. It doesn't magically solve every emotional wave, but it punctures the assumption that you are helpless or doomed. You see that if your fear or anger depends on external factors, you can at least manage your internal response. And if your internal lens is fueling the emotion, you can question it directly. Let me offer a structured approach that I've found helpful and taught to others. 1. Pause and name the emotion. The moment you feel tension rising, say internally, "This is fear," or "This is anger." Labeling it starts to shift it from a reflex to an observed state. 2. Identify the underlying belief. What am I telling myself about this event that triggers such a response? Maybe, "They must treat me with total respect," anger, or "I must not fail at all costs," fear, or "I should have done better to be worthy," shame. Third question, that belief. Is it realistic, stoically speaking? Am I demanding absolute control over external circumstances or others' judgments? Am I presupposing my worth hinges on an outcome or comparison? 4. Reframe. Replace the assumption with a Stoic perspective. I can only control my effort and virtue, not others' actions. Even if I fail, I remain able to adapt. My worth is not destroyed by a single misstep. Let this reframe diffuse the emotional charge. 5. Choose a response. Decide how to act or not act. Maybe you address the situation calmly, or you walk away if it's not worth engagement, or you constructively channel your fear or anger into a measured step. The key is that you're choosing, not blindly reacting. 6. Reflect. Afterward. When it's over, review how well you applied these steps. If you still got swept up, note where you might catch yourself earlier next time. Stoic growth is iterative. It might sound methodical, but in practice, these 6 steps can happen quite swiftly in your mind, especially after some repetition. The Stoics believed that discipline in emotional self-management is like learning any skill. Initial efforts feel awkward, but as you persist, the process becomes more second nature. Over months or years, you might find yourself rarely exploding in anger or sinking into prolonged anxiety because you intercept the pattern as it forms. An interesting note, Stoics do not ask us to eliminate emotion altogether. They acknowledge that basic impulses arise unbidden. Epictetus likened the first flush of passion to a reflex, not wholly controllable. The question is whether you assent to that passion, letting it dominate you, or whether you hold steady, letting it pass without endorsing it. Breaking free from an emotional trap doesn't mean never feeling anger or fear. It means not letting them escalate into destructive cycles. That nuance is important. A Stoic who never feels any emotion isn't Stoic, just numb. True Stoicism is feeling emotion but governing it with reason, harnessing it in some cases or releasing it in others, always guided by your higher principles. Let me close by sharing a final personal anecdote about the shame-guilt dimension. Years ago, I carried deep regret about a time I failed to support a close friend when they desperately needed help. Circumstances made me hesitant, and the moment passed, leaving me with a bitter sense of not living up to my values. For months, shame gnawed at me. Each time I recalled it, I felt worthless, wanting to isolate myself. Finally, Stoic reflection pushed me to face the question, what is shame accomplishing now? If it was motivating me to correct a wrong or apologize, that might be good. But I'd already apologized and tried to support my friend in other ways. The friend had forgiven me, yet I was punishing myself. Stoicism called that out as irrational, so I made a deal with myself. I'd use that memory to stay vigilant for future opportunities to help others promptly, turning the regret into a moral lesson, but I would no longer nurse the shame. I literally said, "No more," when the shame flared. Over time, each time it rose, I reminded myself that I had done what I could to rectify it, and that perseverating only blocked me from living more virtuously now. Gradually, the guilt subsided, replaced by a humble acknowledgement of my past failing and a renewed commitment to do better. That's the Stoic path in a nutshell, turning the stumbling blocks of emotion into stepping stones for moral clarity. In the next part, I'll move us toward the final layer of guidance, how these Stoic methods can weave into your daily routines and relationships so that you systematically reduce emotional traps and nurture a more stable, purposeful mindset. There's beauty in the slow rewiring that happens when Stoic logic and practice become part of how you wake up, how you handle small triggers, and how you wind down at night. So take heart. Once you identify the traps, as we did in part 1, and begin applying these Stoic tactics to break them, you find your life gradually changing in ways that not only bring you personal peace, but also empower you to engage more compassionately with others. That is the ultimate Stoic victory over emotional snare. Over these last 3 parts, I've tried to convey my experience, built over the years and tempered by moments of turmoil, of how anger, fear, shame, envy, and other turbulent emotions can quietly dominate us, warping our ability to think and act clearly. We've seen how Stoic philosophy offers a path to recognize these traps, to name them for what they are, and to begin loosening their hold by reorienting our beliefs. Now, in this concluding portion, I want to tie everything together, offering a vision of how these insights might be woven into your daily routines, your relationships, and your future endeavors. Think of it as a final map, not just so you can spot a trap when it arises, but so you can consistently sidestep it, reclaiming a steadier sense of self. One day, years ago, I found myself in a small cafe, sipping tea with an old friend who'd known me through some of my darkest emotional loops. We were talking about fear and how it paralyzes. He remarked that no matter how many times he read about Stoicism, he couldn't seem to put it into practice when anxiety clawed at his chest. "It all sounds wise," he said, "until I'm actually scared of losing my job or failing at a big project. Then I forget every principle." That conversation stuck with me because it highlighted a truth. Reading or hearing about Stoicism is one thing. Integrating it into life, so that in the heat of the moment you can maintain composure, is another. And that, I believe, is where a structured approach to daily living, particularly your morning and evening habits, can make the difference. If you reinforce Stoic perspectives each day, they become second nature, ready to surface at the flicker of crisis. So let me begin this final part by describing how you might systematically incorporate Stoic practices to preempt or mitigate emotional traps. I see it as 3 tiers. First, there is the ongoing background of your daily life, like your morning routine, your midday reflections, your wind-down rituals at night, that shape your mental environment. Second, there is the immediate response plan when you feel an emotional surge, like a short, practiced pause that you deploy the moment you sense anger or fear. Third, there is the retrospective work, reviewing at day's end how you handled challenges, ensuring you refine your approach next time. Let's break that down in a narrative flow. When you wake up, or whenever your morning occurs if you have an unusual schedule, you can perform a brief Stoic alignment ritual. I've known men who do this in 5 minutes and others who spend half an hour. The essence remains the same. Gather your mind, recall that you control your own judgments, not external events, and perhaps read a short passage from Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius that sets a rational, balanced tone. If you anticipate potentially triggering situations that day, maybe a tense meeting, a family dispute, or an uncertain medical test, spend a moment visualizing them calmly. Picture yourself responding with composure, remembering that your peace isn't forfeit just because events might go awry. This mental rehearsal can be invaluable. By the time you encounter the actual situation, you've softened the element of surprise. This daily morning practice is like building up a reservoir of Stoic clarity that you can draw upon when emotional traps beckon. Then, as you move through your tasks, keep the idea of the Stoic pause in your mental toolkit. The instant you notice a spike of anger or a wave of fear or that sinking shame, slow your breath. Maybe even physically step back if you can. Remind yourself, here is the trap forming. I don't have to fall into it. Ask if the event is within your control. If it's not, like someone else's rude comment or an uncertain outcome you can't fully dictate, you shift your focus to how you can control your reaction. If it is within your control, you calmly decide on the best next move. That might be clarifying a misunderstanding instead of retaliating, or asking for help instead of stewing in silent dread. This Stoic tactic, interrupting the reflex with a reasoned question, can seem trivial, but it's the linchpin of preventing an emotional hijack. Over weeks, you'll see that the more you practice this pause, the easier it becomes to deploy. Emotions become signals rather than masters, telling you something here matters, but not dictating how you must behave. You have now reached the halfway mark of the video. I congratulate you for trying to become a better version of yourself, and I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better every day," so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. Come evening, or whenever your day quiets, you might do a Stoic review. Recall a handful of encounters. Did you notice any emotional traps springing up? Did you manage to pause in time, or did you get swept away? If you got swept away, don't lash yourself with guilt. Instead, treat it as a lesson. Ah, I see that when so-and-so made that sarcastic remark, my anger flared. Next time, I'll remember to label it quickly and respond with a calm statement of boundaries rather than snapping back. This daily reflection cements your growth. The Stoics believed that moral progress is incremental, requiring repeated self-examination. Over months of such reviews, you refine your ability to catch emotional triggers sooner and respond in line with reason. Now, let's consider relationships more deeply, because that's often where emotional traps show their teeth. You might love your spouse or partner dearly, yet find you repeatedly clash over minor issues. or you might sense guilt or jealousy creeping into your dynamic. Stoic self-awareness is your ally here. You can practice open communication that acknowledges your own triggers. I realize I often overreact when you mention finances, and it's not fair to you. Let me take a breath next time and clarify my concerns calmly. By admitting you're working on Stoic techniques, you also invite your partner to understand your perspective rather than interpret your emotional shift as coldness. If they too become curious about Stoic insights, you can cultivate a shared language, like agreeing to pause a heated argument by taking turns to restate each other's point. That break diffuses tension, preventing you from being carried away by anger or resentment. The Stoics never intended their approach to be solitary. They recognized the social dimension, that we thrive in supportive communities where reason prevails over raw passion. Consider also how to handle bigger life transitions, a job loss, a major health scare, a betrayal by a close friend. These can unleash powerful emotional storms, testing your Stoic fortitude. The key remains the same. Recognize the swirl of feelings, ask how much is in your power to change, and anchor your well-being in your capacity for reasoned action. If you lose your job, Stoicism doesn't say, feel nothing. It says, lament the loss appropriately, but do not define your worth solely by that job. Turn your energy towards seeking new opportunities, preserving your dignity, and refusing to let fear or shame consume you. That's how you sidestep the emotional traps of panic or self-loathing. Similarly, if a friend betrays you, Stoicism advises acknowledging the hurt without letting bitterness devour your spirit. You learn from the betrayal, adjust your boundaries or expectations, and keep your composure, choosing not to dwell on hatred. Because hatred, in Stoic eyes, is another trap, a chain that binds your peace to the memory of wrongdoing. At this juncture, you might wonder, but do we stifle genuine feelings of sadness or frustration? Doesn't Stoicism risk making us numb? The answer, from my experience, is no. Stoicism aims not to eradicate emotion, but to keep it proportionate and governed by reason. You can feel sorrow at a loss, you can regret a mistake, you can even feel anger at injustice, yet you won't let those emotions swell into destructive or paralyzing forces. Stoicism encourages a certain sense of emotional flow. Let the initial feeling arise, see it clearly, and decide how to channel it in a way that aligns with your values and fosters growth rather than harm. If you do lose a loved one, you may weep and mourn, but you won't conceive that your entire life must end in despair. You accept mortality as part of nature, focus on honoring their memory, and move forward with compassion for yourself. In that sense, Stoicism is not anti-emotion. It's anti-excess and anti-delusion. One of the practical ways I learned to moderate strong feelings is to connect them to my bodily sensations, like noticing how anger tightens my chest or how anxiety makes my breath shallow. Then I consciously adjust my posture, maybe relaxing my shoulders, taking a deep, slow breath. The Stoics recognized that mind and body are intertwined. By regaining calm physically, you can help your thoughts recenter. It sounds simple, but that synergy is real. People often store tension physically, and releasing it breaks part of the emotional loop. Coupled with the Stoic mental questions, is this under my control? It becomes a potent combination for dissolving the trap. Another dimension is the role of purpose or higher aspiration in preventing emotional entrapment. Stoics speak of living in accordance with nature, which includes fulfilling your unique role as a rational, social being. If you maintain a clear sense of your broader purpose, serving your family, contributing ethically to your profession, caring for a community, then petty emotional storms seem less compelling. Let's say envy arises at a colleague's success. You remind yourself that your real mission is to excel in your duties and grow your moral character. Their success does not obstruct you from that. You stay on your path, less enticed by comparisons. Or if anxiety about an uncertain project flares, you ground yourself in your larger calling. Do your best, adapt if needed, and trust that your worth isn't riding on this single outcome. By anchoring each day in that bigger Stoic vantage, emotional pitfalls lose some of their drama because they no longer define the storyline of your life. Still, sustaining these Stoic practices over time demands a certain discipline. That's why in earlier sections we discussed the power of morning and evening routines, brief moments of reflection, reading a line or two from a Stoic text, or journaling about successes and stumbles. Without these habitual check-ins, the swirl of daily life can make us forget Stoic principles in the heat of the moment. Some men keep a small notebook in their pocket, jotting a Stoic phrase or a reminder like, "Focus on what's in my power." Others use an app that pings them daily with a Stoic quote. The method is personal, but the goal is the same. Keep Stoic wisdom close at hand, ready for action, so that when an emotional spike threatens, you can recall a relevant principle before it's too late. Let me share one last anecdote from a mentee who wrestled with deep shame after a divorce he blamed on his own failings. He'd spiral into self-condemnation, convinced he was irredeemably flawed. We worked on Stoic journaling. Each night he'd write a short reflection naming any shame episodes that day. Then he'd ask, "Is this shame guiding me to fix something in my behavior, or is it just punishing me for the past? Have I done all I can to rectify my mistakes? If so, is further self-flagellation useful or rational?" He found that systematically confronting shame in writing lessened its grip. Over weeks, he reported feeling freer, more able to engage in healthy new relationships. The Stoic approach, identifying the negative cycle, questioning its value, and reorienting toward constructive action, had liberated him from a mental prison. This leads us to the final reflection. How do we measure success once we start applying these Stoic strategies to free ourselves from emotional snares? The Stoics define success not by perfect emotional detachment, but by steady progress toward living with reason and virtue. If you find that anger flares less often or subsides more quickly, that's progress. If fear still arises but no longer paralyzes you, that's progress. If shame no longer locks you in isolation but spurs a healthy accountability, you've taken a major step. Yes, you might still have bad days. Stoicism doesn't promise immunity from the human condition, but if you bounce back sooner, if you remain kinder to yourself and others, if you navigate adversity without losing your center, you embody the Stoic idea of a life in alignment with nature, embracing your rational agency instead of surrendering to emotional chaos. And this Stoic achievement often leads, almost incidentally, to better outcomes in worldly terms. Freed from anger, you handle conflicts with a calm that colleagues or clients appreciate, opening doors to collaboration. Freed from anxiety, you might take bold steps that yield fruitful results. Freed from guilt, you can engage wholeheartedly in new opportunities. Freed from envy, you channel energy into your own growth. Freed from discontent, you find your daily tasks carry a quiet satisfaction. But these external improvements remain secondary to the real victory, the mastery of your internal domain. That's the heart of Stoicism. In concluding all these thoughts, I want to remind you that this approach is a path, not a single leap. Emotional traps do not vanish with one insight. They recede gradually as you practice Stoic vigilance, reflection, and reorientation day by day. Each time you pause when triggered, each time you reframe a fear, each time you gently let go of envy, you lay another brick in the foundation of your Stoic resilience. The process is humbling. It reveals how often we slip. But humility itself is a Stoic virtue, reminding us that perfection is not the goal. Consistent growth is. Over months or years, you can look back and see that once devastating emotional cycles have either weakened or transformed into mild passing waves. Some final advice: be patient, and do not isolate yourself in the pursuit of Stoic calm. Share your journey with a trusted confidant or a community. If you know others who are also exploring Stoic ideas, discuss your challenges and breakthroughs. Sometimes, hearing how a friend overcame fear or shame can spark fresh resolve in you. Or reading a snippet from Seneca's letters can remind you that these struggles are ancient and universal. There's a lineage of philosophers and ordinary folks who've trodden this path. That sense of shared humanity can ease the sting of feeling you must fix everything alone. Above all, never forget the core Stoic principle that your worth and peace lie in how you choose to perceive and respond, not in external events. Emotional traps often revolve around forgetting that truth. We get angry because we think someone's action robs us of dignity, or we get anxious because we confuse an uncertain future with personal doom. The Stoic antidote is to see that dignity and true contentment belong to your internal domain, your capacity to reason, to love virtue, to act with kindness and wisdom. No betrayal, no failure, no scornful word can uproot that unless you allow it. By reclaiming that vantage each day, through mindful routines, conscious pausing when triggered, reframing illusions, and applying reason to intense feelings, you break free from the strangling vines of emotional traps. That freedom fosters a calm energy, a gentle confidence that others might notice in your voice, your posture, your willingness to face setbacks with grace. And so we end this entire script with the hope that these reflections on identifying and breaking free from emotional snares through the lens of Stoic philosophy will serve you in your own life. If you find yourself ensnared by anger, fear, shame, envy, or any other pattern that drains your spirit, know that Stoicism offers tangible tools. See the trap, question its logic, refocus on what you can control, and choose how to respond. With steady application, you can reclaim sovereignty over your emotional landscape. That, to me, is one of the greatest gifts Stoic thought provides. Not an empty promise of never feeling pain, but a path to transforming pain into a catalyst for clarity and virtue. May these practices guide you toward a calmer and more purposeful life, and may you share that calm with those around you, extending the Stoic ethos of rational compassion into a world sorely in need of it. Below is Part 3, The Reckoning of Shadows, the final chapter. This segment concludes the narrative, wrapping up the high-stakes rescue mission and the bitter final confrontation between Marcus Reynolds and Victor Black, while revealing the fates of Lily and the fractured family. This section is intended to be approximately 5,000 words. Marcus's team advanced stealthily through the labyrinthine corridors of Victor Black's compound. The air was thick with tension and the acrid tang of fear mingling with the relentless hum of electronic surveillance. Every step was a calculated risk, every heartbeat an echo of the stakes they had dared to challenge. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he led his elite operatives toward the central command area where he knew Victor Black would be present. Behind him, Daniel and a small contingent had secured the corridor behind the extraction route. Elena's voice crackled softly in their earpieces, relaying intermittent updates from hacked security cameras and live feeds. "All clear on Corridor B," she reported in a measured tone. "No movement detected in the immediate area. You have a window of about 3 minutes before patrols begin to converge." Marcus nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the illuminated path ahead. He recalled the faces of all those whose lives had been ruined by Victor Black's reign, the families, the innocents, and, most painfully, the image of his own daughter Lily, whose life had been twisted beyond recognition. Now that same image burned in his mind as he pushed forward, a guiding light amid the darkness. They reached a heavy, reinforced door marked with a series of biometric locks. Marcus's team halted. "Elena, I need that door disabled," he ordered into the comm. Within seconds, her rapid fingers danced over her portable device. "Bypassing now. Time is short," she replied, her voice laced with concentration. A low mechanical hum signaled that the door's security systems were in the process of disengaging. Marcus exchanged a brief glance with one of his operatives, a silent communication that spoke volumes of shared resolve. As the door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics, the team surged forward into a vast control room. Inside, dim emergency lights bathed the space in an eerie red glow. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from across the compound. In the center, Victor Black stood at a sleek, modern desk, surrounded by several high-ranking guards. His eyes, cold and calculating, lifted from the digital map spread before him when he noticed the sudden intrusion. "Marcus Reynolds," Victor said in a measured, almost amused tone, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I wondered when you'd finally decide to pay me a visit." Marcus stepped forward, his expression a storm of fury and sorrow. "Your games end here, Black," he declared, his voice steady despite the torrent of emotion roiling inside him. "You've stolen too much, taken too many lives, most of all, my daughter." Victor's lips curled into a derisive smile. "Ah, your daughter," he mused. "I must commend you, Marcus. You have been a most entertaining adversary. But you see, everything I have done has been for a purpose, a grand design that you are now too blinded by paternal love to understand." As the tension in the control room reached a fever pitch, one of the guards lunged forward. In a split second, Marcus's team reacted. A fierce, chaotic melee erupted, controlled and brutal. The clashing of bodies and the staccato rhythm of gunfire reverberated through the hall as Marcus's operatives neutralized the immediate threat with practiced efficiency. Yet Marcus's focus remained fixed on Victor and the weight of his own burden. "Enough blood has been spilled," Marcus growled, his eyes narrowing. "Where is my daughter?" Victor's eyes flashed with a mixture of malice and dark amusement. "Your daughter, Lily, or rather Sarah as she now calls herself, is exactly where you left her and where you will find her. But know this, she is not the little girl you once cradled. Years of careful conditioning have reshaped her into something new, a perfect heir to my empire." A heavy silence fell as Marcus absorbed the words. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. For a long, agonizing moment, he saw in his mind's eye the image of Lily at the park, a laughing child with carefree eyes. Then another image intruded, a young woman with steely determination, her gaze devoid of the warmth of innocence, honed by harsh lessons and a ruthless mentor. "Show me her," Marcus demanded. "Now!" Victor nodded slowly and turned to one of his aides, who promptly activated a secure feed on one of the large monitors. The screen flickered and then revealed a live image of a room in a remote wing of the compound. There, behind reinforced glass, sat Sarah, seated in a minimalist clinical chamber. The transformation was stark. Her posture was impeccable, her eyes sharp and unyielding, and even the faintest trace of the child she once was seemed eclipsed by a veneer of cold efficiency. In one hand, she cradled a weapon with a familiarity that spoke of years of training, her expression betraying a calculated detachment. Marcus's throat constricted with a pained mix of love and horror. "Lily, my daughter," he murmured, as if the word itself was both a prayer and a curse. Victor's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Yes, she is still mine in every way that matters. You gave me the greatest gift by pursuing me, Marcus. Your relentless obsession, your very failure, enabled me to mold her as I saw fit. A sudden alarm blared throughout the compound. Elena's voice, urgent and clipped, came through the comm. Marcus, our diversion team is holding off the reinforcements, but we're running out of time. Extraction is compromised. The air in the control room shifted, charged with imminent peril. Marcus's eyes flickered between Victor and the monitor, torn between his burning desire for retribution and the desperate need to save his daughter. "I won't let you take her from me," he vowed, his voice resonating with the weight of a man who had lost everything and was now ready to sacrifice even his soul for one final chance at redemption. Victor stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. "Then prove it," he challenged. "Come for her. Let us see if the father who once soared on dreams of redemption can now contend with the harsh reality of what you have become." The words hung in the air as Marcus's team regrouped. With swift, silent signals, his operatives formed a protective barrier around him. Daniel's voice crackled in the comm. "Marcus, we're detecting heavy reinforcements moving in from the north wing. We have less than 2 minutes before they converge on this room." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind a tumult of memories and determination. "I'm going to extract her," he said, steeling himself for the final confrontation. "Daniel, secure the exit. Elena, keep the feed open. Lucas, I need you to stay on the line and update me on any movement around the extraction point." Victor smirked, a cold, calculated expression that belied the chaos unfolding around them. "So be it. But know that the path you choose now will determine everything. You have one chance to save her. If you fail, you will lose her forever." In a blur of motion, Marcus lunged forward, his team fanning out to intercept the incoming guards. The firefight was swift and brutal. Marcus fought with the precision of a man whose every muscle was honed by years of training and the raw desperation of a father. Bullets flew, and the metallic tang of blood mingled with the acrid scent of smoke as the operatives engaged in a fierce skirmish against Black's forces. In the chaos, Marcus's focus never wavered from the monitor showing Lily's chamber. With each heartbeat, the screen became a battleground of conflicting emotions. He recalled the lullabies he once sang to her, the gentle caress of her hand in his, a stark contrast to the hardened figure now before him. As Marcus fought his way through the guards, his eyes locked onto that image, his determination surging like a tidal wave. At last, after a desperate struggle that left the room echoing with the sounds of combat, Marcus and a select group of his operatives reached the corridor leading directly to the extraction point. Eleanor's voice, urgent yet calm, guided them. "Marcus, the service elevator is clear. Use it to descend to the lower level and then follow the marked exit route. I'm jamming the reinforcements, but you must move now." Marcus gripped his weapon tightly as he ordered, "Everyone, fall in and secure the perimeter. We can't afford to lose one more second." With grim determination, he raced down the corridor, each step weighted by the hope of reuniting with Lily and the terror of what he might find. Inside the service elevator, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Marcus's face was a mask of steely resolve as the doors slid shut, plunging him momentarily into a world of dark silence. In that brief pause, his mind was a battlefield of memories, a montage of a daughter's laughter on sunlit days, a father's unfulfilled promises, and the searing realization of a transformation he had never anticipated. The elevator doors opened onto a lower level that served as a back exit to the compound. Marcus led his team through a narrow corridor, the only light provided by sporadic emergency fixtures flickering overhead. Every step felt like an eternity as the distant sounds of approaching reinforcements reverberated through the walls. Finally, they reached a heavily guarded door, the final barrier between Marcus and the extraction zone. The door was secured by an electronic lock, but Elena's earlier hack had given them a slim window of opportunity. "I'm on it," she whispered over the comm. Her voice was the calm in the storm, and within seconds, the lock's security protocols were bypassed. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a spacious room lit by pale, cold light. In the center of the room stood a single figure, seated at a table. It was Lily, or rather Sarah, her posture impeccable, her eyes focused on a dossier spread out before her. The transformation was complete. No trace of the playful, loving daughter Marcus had once known remained. In her place was a young woman molded by years of ruthless training. Yet in that moment, as Marcus stepped forward, a flicker of recognition of something buried deep within sparked in her eyes. "Lily," Marcus breathed, his voice trembling with a potent mix of hope and anguish. He reached out slowly, his hand extended in a tentative gesture of reconciliation. For a long, agonizing moment, time stood still. The silence was heavy with the echoes of a past that could never be reclaimed, and the uncertain promise of a future that hung by a thread. Lily's gaze, so cold and disciplined moments before, wavered. A single tear, incongruous with her hardened expression, shimmered in the corner of her eye. "Father," she said in a voice that was both distant and laden with regret, a voice that carried the weight of the years spent under Victor Black's tutelage. "You've come, at last." Marcus's heart clenched. "Lily, I've missed you every day of my life. I'm here to bring you home, back to us, to who you truly are. This monster, Victor Black, has stolen you away from your real life." Lily's eyes flashed with a conflict that betrayed the conditioned loyalty she had been forced to cultivate. For a moment, the veneer of the perfect operative cracked, revealing the raw vulnerability of a child betrayed. I don't know if I can go back," she whispered. "Everything I was taught, everything I was forced to become, it's all a part of me now." Marcus stepped closer, his voice soft yet insistent. "You are more than what they made you. You are my daughter, Lily, my little girl who laughed on roller coasters and danced in the sunlight. I know it's hard, but deep inside, you are still you. Let me help you find that." The room seemed to hold its breath as Lily's eyes searched his face, looking for the lost warmth, the unconditional love that had once been her sanctuary. The door behind them creaked as reinforcements began to close in. The urgency of the situation pressed in on all sides, but for a few suspended moments, nothing else existed but the fragile connection between a father and his daughter. A loud clatter from outside shattered the quiet intimacy. "Extraction team, move out!" Daniel's urgent voice rang out over the comm, cutting through the heavy atmosphere. Marcus's team had secured the perimeter outside, but time was running short. Lily's gaze hardened as she took one final lingering look at Marcus, a look that mingled pain, love, and defiant determination. I want to come with you," she said, her voice trembling as she rose from the table. With a hesitant motion, she reached for the weapon at her side, a symbol of all the conditioning that had been forced upon her. For a heartbeat, her hand hovered over it, a struggle between obedience and rebellion raging within her. "Don't!" Marcus cried out, instinctively moving to grasp her arm. "Lily, please, I'm not going to let you be their puppet any longer." Her eyes flashed, as if caught in a battle between two worlds. Then, with a resolute nod that spoke of an inner war nearly won, she dropped the weapon at her feet. "I'm coming with you," she repeated, her voice steadier now, as if reclaiming a fragment of the daughter she once was. "I want to know who I really am." A ripple of relief passed through Marcus as he pulled her into a tight embrace, the warmth of her presence mingling with the bitter taste of years lost. In that embrace lay the promise of redemption, a chance to undo the damage inflicted by Victor Black's insidious influence. But even as they clung to each other, alarms began to blare outside, signaling that their window was rapidly closing. "Move it!" Daniel's command rang out as the sound of approaching reinforcements grew louder. Marcus exchanged a final resolute glance with Lily. "Stay close to me," he ordered, leading her toward the extraction exit. Eleanor's voice, now almost frantic, provided one last update. "Extraction point secured. I'm initiating the diversion protocol. This is your chance." The corridor outside erupted into chaos as Marcus's team fought a desperate standoff with Black's reinforcements. Gunfire echoed, and the metallic scent of blood and sweat mixed with the acrid smell of burning circuitry. Through it all, Marcus and Lily pressed forward, every step a defiant challenge to the darkness that had long held them captive. At the extraction point, a nondescript service door bolted against the tide of chaos. Marcus's team met the armored van waiting like a lifeline. With grim determination, they surged inside, pulling the door shut just as a barrage of bullets shattered the silence behind them. Inside the van, the atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion, relief, and the profound silence of survival. As the van sped away from the compound along a winding coastal road, Marcus clutched Lily's hand tightly. Outside, the island receded into the distance, swallowed by the early morning light and the chaotic aftermath of a battle that would be remembered for years to come. In the cramped confines of the vehicle, surrounded by comrades who had risked everything, Marcus allowed himself a moment of vulnerable reflection. He stared out the window at the dark silhouette of the island, and then at Lily, whose eyes, though still tinged with the remnants of conditioning, now shone with a fragile hope. "We have a long road ahead," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But we'll rebuild our family piece by piece. I promise you, Lily, I will never let them break you again." Lily's fingers tightened around his as she whispered, "I'm scared, Father. I'm scared of what I've become and what the world will think of me now." Marcus's eyes softened. "We will face that together. You are not defined by what they made you. You are defined by your heart, by the love we share. Today, we begin to heal the wounds of the past and forge a new future." In the days and weeks that followed, Marcus, Lily, and the remnants of their team worked tirelessly to bring down Victor Black's sprawling criminal network. The operation, bolstered by the damning evidence recovered from the compound and the courageous testimonies of those who had once lived in fear, ignited a global manhunt. International law enforcement agencies, spurred into action by the intricate web of intelligence that Marcus had painstakingly compiled, began to dismantle Black's empire piece by piece. Victor Black, ever the elusive mastermind, evaded capture for a time, his intricate network crumbling under the pressure of relentless pursuit. But the seeds of his downfall had been sown by Marcus's unwavering determination and by the courage of a daughter who had reclaimed her identity. In the final days of the operation, as Marcus watched the news reports confirming the arrest of several high-ranking operatives within Black's network, he allowed himself a moment of bittersweet triumph, a triumph tempered by the scars of loss and the knowledge that the battle had reshaped them all. At last, as the sun set on a hard-won day of justice, Marcus and Lily stood together on the balcony of a modest safe house far from the chaos of the old world. The sky, awash with hues of orange and purple, bore witness to a fragile hope emerging from the ashes of a life once consumed by darkness. Lily, still carrying the echoes of her past, but now determined to forge a new path, leaned into her father's embrace. In that embrace was the promise of redemption, of healing, and of a future unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday. "Thank you," Lily whispered, her voice trembling with both relief and sorrow, "for not giving up on me." Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he replied, I would have never stopped, even if it meant fighting the whole world. You are my daughter, and I will always love you." In that moment, as the first stars emerged in the twilight sky, Marcus and Lily began the arduous journey of rebuilding what had been so brutally shattered. A journey toward forgiveness, healing, and the slow, painful restoration of a family that had been torn apart by obsession and revenge. The scars of the past would remain, etched into their souls like indelible ink, but they also served as a testament to their resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, the promise of dawn was never far away. And so, as the world around them continued to reel from the revelations of Victor Black's downfall and the exposure of a criminal empire built on pain, Marcus Reynolds and his daughter Lily embraced the uncertain future with cautious optimism. They understood that the road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, yet together they had already taken the first steps toward reclaiming their lives. In the years that followed, Lily worked to reconcile the two halves of her identity, the child who once danced in the light and the soldier forged in the crucible of Victor Black's design. With her father's steadfast support and the love of those who had fought alongside them, she embarked on a mission not only to heal herself, but to help others who had been scarred by the machinations of ruthless power. Her transformation, once the weapon of a twisted mastermind, became a symbol of rebirth, a beacon of hope for all those who believed that even the deepest wounds could, in time, mend. Marcus, too, underwent a transformation. No longer defined solely by his relentless pursuit of justice or by the guilt of missed moments, he gradually learned to embrace the fragile beauty of reconciliation. The echoes of the past remained, but they no longer held him captive. Instead, they served as a solemn reminder of the cost of obsession and the precious nature of every fleeting moment with those we love. As the safe house gave way to the promise of new beginnings, Marcus and Lily carved out a space for healing, a space where the wounds of yesterday could finally begin to close. And though the shadows of loss would never vanish entirely, the light of a new dawn shone brightly on their path forward. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.